Some men measure a man by his handshake. I measured mine by how long he could look me in the eye after asking to borrow money he had no intention of paying back. Smile, Walt. Just smile and carve the turkey. That's what I kept telling myself at my own dining room table in Cedar Falls, the house I'd built board by board on a stretch of land my father left me. The kind of place where the porch light stays on for family, whether they deserve it or not. I wanted my son Danny's new in-laws to feel like part of something real. I wanted his wife Priya's parents to sit at that table and see a family that had nothing to hide. I didn't get that. I got something else instead. And it started with a comment about the gravy. "Is this from a jar, Walt?" Priya's father Ashok asked, holding his fork like it had insulted him personally. His tone made every sentence sound like a cross-examination. "No, sir," I said. "My late wife's recipe. Made it every year she was alive, and I've made it every year since." Ashok set his fork down like the gravy had a smell. "How rustic," he said. His wife Mira gave me the kind of smile you give a child who just handed you a macaroni necklace. "And remind us, Walt, what did you say you did for work?" "Foreman," I said. 31 years at the plant before I retired." "Foreman," Mira repeated, letting the word sit in her mouth like it tasted bad. "How stable," she said, and turned back to her wine glass. "Stable." Like I'd told her I collected soda cans for a living. I let it go. My son Danny was laughing at something his wife whispered to him, her hand resting on his arm, and that right there, that was worth every ounce of condescension these two could ladle over my mashed potatoes. I've buried a wife. I've worked double shifts to keep this house standing when the plant cut hours 2 years running. I know how to swallow disrespect with a smile. What I didn't know was they didn't think I could hear the real thing. Hey folks, if you're new here, welcome to the channel. I'm Walt, and tonight's story is one I've been sitting on for a long time because, frankly, it still gets my blood up just thinking about it. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought you were simpler than you are, you're going to want to stay for this one. Hit that like button, tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight, because trust me, this story earns it. Here's what nobody at that table knew about me. Not Danny, not Priya, not her parents. Before I ever ran a foreman's crew, before I ever hung drywall for a living, I spent 6 years as a young man doing translation and cultural liaison work for an engineering firm that built refineries across South Asia. I wasn't fluent because of some classroom. I was fluent because you learn a language fast when your job depends on understanding a contractor screaming at you in Hindi about a delivery that's 3 weeks late. I came home, married my Carol, took a foreman job because it paid steady and let me be home for dinner, and I let that whole chapter of my life go quiet. Nobody on a factory floor in Cedar Falls needs to know you can read a Devanagari script. It never came up. Not until that Thanksgiving. About halfway through dinner, Ashok leaned toward Mira and murmured something low in Hindi, a little laugh riding on the end of it. And Mira, thinking she was perfectly safe, thinking the retired foreman across the table was just a nice enough old man who built decks in his spare time, answered him right back in Hindi. Like flipping a switch. They think I'm part of the furniture. I kept my face still. I kept buttering my roll, and I listened. They talked about my house first. Mira called it Dahadi. Ashok chuckled and agreed, said something about how Americans confuse cozy with cramped. Small stuff. Petty, but small. The kind of thing you let roll off you if you have to. Then Mira's eyes drifted past my shoulder to the mantel, where I keep a photograph of the cedar hope chest I built for my daughter Angela the year she turned 16, the one she keeps her mother's old letters in now that Carol's gone. Mira tilted her head at it and murmured, amused, quiet, probably from a big box store, assembled with an Allen wrench. Americans call anything with 4 legs furniture. I set my fork down. Not hard. Not a scene. Just down, deliberate. The kind of quiet that if you knew me, you'd know meant something had shifted. She's talking about the chest I built for my little girl. She's talking about 11 weekends of my life like it's particle board I found on a curb. Nobody noticed. Danny was pouring more wine. Priya was scrolling her phone under the table, smiling at something. Mira took a slow sip, pleased with herself. The way you are when you've landed a joke nobody in the room can call you out on. Except I could. I looked up. Ashok caught my eye first, just testing, seeing if the old man had clocked anything. I smiled at him, easy, warm, the kind of smile that says, everything's just fine here. You know, I said in English, folding my napkin, I've always believed the things a man builds with his own two hands say more about him than anything he could ever buy. Don't you think so, Ashok? Ashok blinked. Of course, Walt. Good, I said. I'd hate for anyone at this table to think I don't know the difference between something cheap and something built to last. I let that hang there for exactly 2 seconds. Long enough. Not too long. You have no idea what you just said in front of me, and I'm not going to tell you. Not yet. That should have been the worst of it. It wasn't. About 20 minutes later, after the pie came out, Mira leaned toward Danny, not Ashok, this time, her own son-in-law, and asked, casual as asking about the weather, in Hindi, "Are the documents ready?" Danny nodded, barely glancing up from his phone, told her, sometime after the new year, maybe before, still waiting on the accountant. I kept my face exactly where it was, pleasant, interested in nothing but my pie. Documents. What documents? Ready for what? I didn't get the rest of it that night. That came later, in pieces, the way these things do, but I got enough. I got a phrase from Ashok that turned my stomach in a way Mira's comment about the hope chest never could. Whoa, Buddha itna akela hai ki kuch bhi kar dega. That lonely old man will do anything we ask. And then Danny, my own son, the boy I taught to throw a spiral in this very yard, laughed. Actually laughed, and said in English, turning back to the table like flipping a switch, told you he'd never say no to family stuff, especially now that it's just him in that big house. He's lonely, he wants us around, he'll sign whatever we put in front of him. Then he squeezed Priya's hand and asked her if she wanted more pie, that same easy grin on his face he's had since he could walk. He's not honoring his father. He's managing me. And I just watched the whole performance from 6 feet away. I sat there with my coffee going cold, watching my son hold his wife's hand with the same hand he'd just used to call me an easy mark. I wanted to stand up right then, throw my napkin down, ask Ashok in his own language exactly what documents he thought I was so eager to sign. Don't. Not yet. Not here. Because here's the thing about being a father you learn the hard way. If you blow up at your own Thanksgiving table over something your son can't even hear coming, you're not the wounded party in that story anymore. You're just the bitter old widower who ruined the holidays. Danny would defend his in-laws. He'd tell people Dad's gotten difficult since Mom passed. And I would have handed them exactly the story they needed. So I smiled. I helped clear the plates. I walked Ashok and Mira out to their rental car and told them how glad I was they'd made the trip, and I meant every word of it, in a way neither one of them would understand until it was far too late to matter. I sat in my truck in my own driveway for a long while before I went back inside. They think I'm a lonely old fool. They think this is already decided. I thought about that hope chest. About 11 weekends sanding cedar in my garage while Carol brought me coffee and told me Angela was going to cry when she saw it. I thought about documents. I thought about the word Akela, lonely, and how it had been used about me like I was a line item somebody was counting on. And I made myself a promise right there with the engine ticking as it cooled. I'm not going to say a word, not yet, but I am going to find out exactly what they think they're getting away with. And when I do, I'm going to let them explain it to me themselves, in whatever language makes them most comfortable. My daughter Angela called me the next morning before I'd even finished my coffee. Dad, thank you for hosting, she said. Danny said it went great. She has no idea what I heard last night, and it's going to hurt her too when she finds out, but it'll hurt cleaner than what they've got planned. I told her I was glad everyone came, and I meant that too, just not the way she thought. Then I called an old colleague of mine, a woman named Diane Okafor, who'd left the refinery work same time I did and gone into forensic accounting, the kind of work where people call you when they suspect somebody's cooking the books. We hadn't talked in 3 years. She picked up on the second ring. Walt Sutter, she said. It's been a minute. Everything okay? No, I said. I need a favor, and I need you to be very good at what you do. They thought the hardest part was already behind them. They thought all that was left was getting an old man's signature. They had no idea I used to be the guy other people hired to catch exactly this kind of thing. Give them precisely what they expect. A grieving, grateful widower who's happy for the company. That became my job for the next few weeks. Not foreman, not father, understudy. I called Danny that same afternoon and told him I'd been thinking, and since Ashok and Mira were flying back for the holidays anyway, why not have them stay a week at the cabin on the lake, my late father's place, 20 minutes out, fully stocked, better than any hotel. Let them really get a feel for how we do things out here. There was a pause on the line. Dad, are you sure? I know last night got a little tense. It was more tense than you know, son. I want this family thing to work, I told him, and every word of that was true, just not in the way he thought. Let me do this. He got quiet, and I could hear the relief creeping into his voice. That would mean a lot to them, Dad. Thanks. I hung up and stood in my kitchen a long moment, looking out at that cabin across the water, the place my father built with his own hands the same summer I was born. You want a front row seat to my life? Fine, come on in. Just remember I can hear you from every room in that cabin, in every language you've got. Ashok and Mira settled into the cabin 2 days later, and for the better part of a week I played my part like I'd been rehearsing it my whole life. I asked Ashok about his garden back home. I let Mira correct the way I seasoned the chili at a Sunday cookout, told her I'd try it her way sometime, all while cataloging every word out of both their mouths like evidence, because it was evidence. I just wasn't filing it with anyone yet. You want to underestimate me? Good. That's the only weapon I need. On a Thursday night, after they'd turned in early, claiming jet lag, though I had a hunch it was something else keeping them tired, I sat in my truck in the driveway and called Diane back. Talk to me, I said. What'd you find? Diane didn't waste time on small talk. Never did. Walt, she said, this one's ugly. Ashok's import business, the one he's always bragging about at family dinners, it's hollowed out. Filed for the Indian equivalent of a restructuring 18 months ago and never came back from it. There are liens against the family property going back 2 years. Real numbers, Walt. Numbers that don't get fixed by selling off a car. I sat there, gripping the wheel, staring at the dark windows of my own father's cabin like I could see straight through the walls. And Danny? I asked. Diane exhaled, and that told me before she even said the words. Danny's got a business partner suing him over a failed investment app they launched 2 years back. Took a handful of people's retirement money down with it when it collapsed. Nothing criminal, but it's not nothing either. And Walt, he never told your daughter or anybody in this family a word of it. Not one word, I said. There's more, Diane said. You mentioned they've been talking about some kind of family trust, calling it estate planning. I'd put money on it not being that at all. If they can get access to your property through a joint trust, especially anything routed through an offshore account, that's collateral. That's a way to keep Ashok's whole mess from collapsing without anyone back home ever finding out how bad it got. I sat in the dark a long while after we hung up, letting it settle. They didn't fly out here for turkey and pie. They flew out here because I own 11 acres free and clear, and they need it. I thought about Danny's face at that table, the way he'd looked at Priya like she hung the moon, the way Angela had called that morning thanking me for trying so hard, thinking her old man was the one who needed to prove himself. She has no idea her brother's the one being managed, and she has no idea for what. The opening came that Sunday. I invited them all over for a late brunch. Ham, biscuits, good coffee, nothing Ashok could find fault with. Walt, he began, setting his cup down and sliding into that smooth, rehearsed warmth of his. Danny tells us you own quite a bit of land out past the county line. In our family, we believe in consolidating what we've built for the next generation. We've had our attorney draft a family trust, something to protect Danny and Priya long term. We'd love for you to look it over before the new year. He didn't hand me a pen. He was testing the water first, seeing if the old man would bite before he paid a lawyer to finalize anything. Family looking after family, Mira added softly. It's how we protect our children. That sounds mighty generous, I said, scratching my jaw like a man working hard to follow something complicated. I ran a factory floor for 30 years, Mira. I don't know the first thing about trusts and offshore whatever you call it. Why don't you have your people send it straight to me? I'll take a look. I watched the flicker of triumph cross Ashok's face. He thought he'd set the hook and I was swimming right for the net. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table with that folder spread out under the lamp, reading line after line of language that might as well have been Hindi for how little sense it made to me. Terms like irrevocable trust structure, terms like beneficial interest assignment. My eyes kept sliding right off the page. I can read a set of blueprints upside down in bad light. I could not make heads or tails of this. I almost didn't pick up the phone. 30 years of handling my own affairs, my own contracts. There's a stubborn pride in that, and it doesn't love admitting when it's out past its depth. But I thought about Angela signing something like it one day, thinking it was a gift from her brother's new family. I called Roy Kessler at 9:30, my attorney since before Carol and I bought this land. Roy, it's Walt. Sorry for the hour. Walt Sutter, calling after 9, Roy said. This can't be good. What's going on? I can't make sense of this trust nonsense somebody handed me, I said, and I read him 3 lines straight off the page, slow so he could follow. There was a long pause on his end, long enough my stomach dropped before he said a word. Walt, Roy said, his voice dropping into that flat, careful tone he uses when somebody's about to get taken for a ride. This isn't a gift and it isn't estate planning. It's a cross-collateralization agreement. Explain that in plain terms, Roy. They've structured it so your 11 acres become the loan guarantor for Ashok's overseas business. If his company defaults, and Diane's numbers say it's about to, the lenders have an immediate, unappealable claim against your land. You're not signing a trust, Walt. You're signing a note that pays off a stranger's debt with your father's farm. I sat back in my chair. There it is. Send me everything you've got tonight, Roy said. You'll have it in 10 minutes, I told him. I hung up and sat there in the quiet of my own kitchen, and something in my chest went very still. They weren't marrying into this family. They were buying it, and they were going to use my son's marriage to do it. I thought about the hope chest again, about lonely old man will do anything, and every small cruelty they'd let slip in a language they thought was a locked door. You didn't outsmart me. You just underestimated the wrong old man. I wasn't hot angry anymore. What settled into me that night was colder, steadier. I'm not some genius. I'm just a man who knows when to call for backup. And I've got backup now. The next morning I found Ashok on the cabin porch with his coffee. Same spot every morning, looking out over the water like a man surveying land he already half considered his own. Not yet, Ashok. Not ever, actually. But you don't know that. Morning, I said, sitting across from him. I read through that folder last night. He set his cup down, attentive now, that practiced warmth sliding onto his face. Honestly, it's a lot, I said, running a hand through my hair like a man genuinely in over his head. This sounds like it'd be good for Danny and Priya. I really believe that. But I want to do this properly. Let me have my own attorney draw up a clean, updated version, something simple everybody can follow, and we all sign it together, the whole family, at the wedding rehearsal dinner in front of everyone. I watched it land on his face, that flicker of surprise smoothing quick into something like delight. That's a wonderful idea, Walt, Ashok said, and I'd have believed every syllable of it if I hadn't heard what I'd heard the week before. Signing in front of the whole family. Very meaningful. You have no idea how meaningful. Mira came out just then, drawn by the warmth in her husband's voice, and when Ashok told her the plan, she actually pressed her hands together. Oh, Walt, she said, this means so much to us. It means a great deal to me too, I said, and that part at least was true. They believed it. I could see it in both their faces, the quiet, private triumph of 2 people who thought they'd successfully played a lonely old man for exactly what they needed. I could practically hear the arithmetic running behind Ashok's eyes. Weeks now. Just weeks, and the whole mess back home gets buried. And nobody there ever has to know how close it came. Let them believe it. Let them raise a glass to it tonight. It's the last thing they're going to get to celebrate on my dime. The weeks between that porch conversation and the wedding rehearsal moved slow and fast all at once. Slow the way waiting always is. Fast the way a countdown feels once you know exactly what's coming. Roy worked with me every evening, building the real story into something clean and undeniable. The liens, the lawsuit, the exact clause buried in that trust that would have handed my land to a man on the other side of the world. Diane sent over documentation, translated, notarized, airtight. And every day I still smiled across the table at Ashok, still let Mira correct my chili, still let Danny call me Pop with that easy grin, like we were already exactly the family he needed us to be. Like he hadn't sat 2 weeks earlier and told his in-laws his own father was too lonely to say no. Keep smiling, son. You've got no idea what's coming. Angela, for her part, floated through those weeks happier than I'd seen her in a long time, helping Priya with seating charts, texting me photos of centerpiece options like my opinion on flowers had ever mattered to anybody before. Dad, what do you think, white lilies or the wildflower mix? I stared at that text a long time before answering. Wildflowers, I typed back. Because in a couple weeks, sweetheart, I'm going to hand your brother back a life that's actually his, and I want it to look like something that grew here, not something shipped in. The rehearsal dinner was set for a Saturday evening out at the cabin, string lights strung between the pines, the good folding tables, set with real linen because Carol always said a family occasion deserved real linen even out at the lake. Ashok and Mira held court near the head of the table, champagne in hand, my champagne, from a case I'd bought specifically for that night, though not for the reason they thought. 2 more hours, Ashok. Enjoy the view. I caught Mira leaning toward Danny near the drink table, her voice low, her eyes cutting toward me across the yard. I wasn't close enough to catch all of it, not with the band tuning up and 40 conversations going at once, but I didn't need all of it. I'd heard enough of these two by now to fill in the rest just from the shape of her mouth. Deko kitna kush hai. Look how happy he is. Danny smirked into his glass and said something back I couldn't catch. I didn't need the words. I'd heard that tone before. Over Thanksgiving gravy and a hope chest they called particle board. Go ahead. Enjoy the last few minutes of thinking you've won. Roy was there too, off to the side in a sport coat, nursing a club soda, looking every bit like an old family friend, and nothing like the man with a folder in his car that was about to end two people's entire scheme. He caught my eye once and gave me the smallest nod. Ready when you are. I looked over at Danny, laughing with his old college buddies near the dessert table, his rehearsal dinner jacket catching the string lights, happier than I'd seen him in longer than I could remember. I'm sorry, son. I'm about to break your heart tonight. But I'd rather break it now than watch them break it slow for the rest of your life, one lie at a time. I picked up my glass and tapped it once with my ring, the sound cutting clean through the noise. Conversations dropped off one by one until the only sound left was crickets in the tree line and a string light buzzing faintly overhead. If everyone could give me just a minute, I said, standing at the head of the table. I promise I won't keep you from the pie for long. That got a laugh. Good. Let them stay loose a little while longer. Most of you know me, I started. I don't love speeches. I'd rather be out fixing a fence somewhere than up here with everybody looking at me. Another easy laugh. Danny beamed at me from his seat, that same warm, grateful look he'd had since Thanksgiving. Thanks for trying so hard with them, Dad. I did try, son. Just maybe not the way you think. My boy's getting married in 2 weeks, I said. And I've spent every day since his mother passed trying to make sure this family never has to wonder if somebody's telling them the truth. I let that sit a second. My eyes moved briefly to Danny. He was still smiling, still holding his glass loose in one hand, a man with absolutely nothing to hide. Not for long. I want to thank Ashok and Mira, I said, turning toward them, raising my glass slightly, for coming all this way to be part of this family. That's not a small thing, flying halfway around the world for people you barely know. Ashok dipped his head, gracious, practiced. The honor is entirely ours, Walt. I'm sure it is, I said. Something in my tone must have caught, because I saw Mira's smile flicker, just barely, just at the edges, the way you notice a draft under a door you thought was sealed shut. Since our guests came all the way from home, I said, turning to face the whole table, my voice steady and easy, I thought it was only right to honor them properly. Especially since they've spent the last few weeks assuming I couldn't understand a single word they were saying. I looked directly at Ashok. The color started draining out of his face. I switched into Hindi, the accent I'd buried for 30 years coming out sharp and clean. I watched Ashok's glass freeze halfway to his mouth. Mira went rigid. For weeks, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet yard. You spoke about my son and my family, like line items on a spreadsheet. You mocked my home. You called me a lonely old fool while planning to take my land right out from under my family's feet. Danny scrambled up out of his chair, his face flushed red. Dad, stop, wait. I switched back to English, cold as steel. Sit down, Danny, then back into Hindi. One more sentence, aimed straight at Ashok. I heard every single word you said about me. Those words hit that table like a dropped plate. 40 faces turned, first toward Ashok and Mira, then toward me, then slowly toward Danny, whose expression slid from confusion into something else entirely. Something breaking. Dad, he started, his voice small. What? I'm sorry, son, I said, and I meant it more than I'd meant anything in a long time. I didn't want you finding this out like this. But I couldn't let you find out after the wedding either. I reached down beside my chair and picked up the folder Roy had brought, the same kind of leather folder Ashok had slid across my porch table weeks earlier, except this one didn't have a single lie inside it. 2 weeks ago, I said, laying it open for everyone to see, Ashok and Mira asked me to sign a family trust. Called it estate planning. A gift, they said, a way to bring us all together properly. I flipped to the first page. What it actually was a transfer of my 11 acres into a holding structure controlled entirely by Ashok Malhotra. Gasps ran down the table. One of Priya's cousins covered her mouth. Roy stood quiet near the drink table, letting me carry it the rest of the way. Ashok's business back home is hollowed out, I said, turning another page. Been collapsing for the better part of 2 years. There are liens against his property going back further than that. And Danny, I looked at my son now, steady, no anger left in my voice, just fact after fact after fact, has a lawsuit sitting against him back home from a business partner. He lost other people's retirement money for, and never once mentioned it to the woman he's marrying in 2 weeks. That's not, Danny started, half rising again. Walt, that's not what it, Mira began. I'm not finished, I said, and something in my voice made both of them go still. Priya stared at Danny now, really waiting. The way you wait for somebody to prove you wrong about the worst thing you've ever let yourself think about them. Danny's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Priya, it's not what it looks like. She cut him off, and her voice, when it came, was calmer than I expected, colder than I'd ever heard from her. You called your own father a lonely old fool, she said, to my parents, at Thanksgiving, while they were planning to take his land. She reached down, slow and deliberate, and pulled the ring off her finger, set it down on the table beside his untouched pie. I was ready to build a life with you, she said, and you were ready to build it on top of him. She stood, and instead of turning toward her cousins, instead of running off the way anybody might have forgiven her for doing, she walked around the table to where I was standing. She didn't hide behind me. She stood beside me, shoulder to shoulder. That's my girl, I thought, even though she wasn't mine by blood. Not yet, maybe not ever now, but she'd earned the thought anyway. I turned back to Danny, who still hadn't found his footing, his in-laws on either side of him gone pale and silent, cornered by their own words coming back to them in a language they'd never once imagined would betray them. I handed Danny a second document from the folder. Not the trust this time. That's an itemized bill, I said, for everything your in-laws have run up during their stay at your grandfather's cabin, and a notice that they'll need to be out by tomorrow morning. Ashok found his voice first, thin and brittle. Walt, surely we can discuss this. We discussed plenty, I said, in 2 languages apparently. I just didn't join in until tonight. I picked up my champagne glass, the one I'd raised at the very start of the evening, and took a slow sip, savoring it, then set it back down with a small deliberate click. And Ashok, I said, I paid for tonight out of my own retirement account. I'd say you're welcome, but we both know you don't mean it when you say thank you. I gestured toward the dark tree line, toward the cabin lit up gold across the water, the same cabin my father built the summer I was born. The cabin's unlocked, I said. You're welcome to stay there tonight, but I'd call ahead for a hotel instead. Breakfast is better there anyway. Nobody at that table said a word. Ashok's jaw worked like he wanted to salvage something, anything, out of the wreckage, but there was nothing left to salvage, not with a folder full of documentation sitting open on the table, not with his own words handed back to him in the very language he thought made him untouchable. I looked down at Priya. She looked up at me, tears standing in her eyes, but her jaw set, steady. You ready, sweetheart? I asked her, quiet, just for her. She nodded. Together, we walked away from that table, past the string lights, past 40 stunned faces, and one folder that had just ended a scheme. Two people flew 8,000 miles to pull off. Behind us, I heard Mira's voice crack, high and desperate, calling after us words I didn't bother turning around to catch, in English or in Hindi. It didn't matter anymore. I'd heard everything I needed to hear from that family the first night over my late wife's gravy, thinking I couldn't understand a single word of it. You were wrong about a lot of things, Ashok. But you were most wrong about that. Priya slipped her hand into mine as we walked toward the cabin, and something about it steadied me more than I expected. Thank you, Walt, she said quietly, for hearing what I couldn't. Always, sweetheart, I said. Every single word. Behind us, the string lights kept glowing over an empty toast, and a family that had crossed an ocean to take something from us and left instead with nothing but the sound of their own words, finally understood. If this story got you, hit that like button, tell me where you're watching from tonight, and stick around. Because trust me, this isn't the last time somebody underestimated me and lived to regret it. I'll see you in the next one.